The Director of Public Prosecutions, DPP, Paula Llewellyn, says her office is prepared to retry the gun case against Dennis Mundell following a ruling from the Court of Appeal. On Friday, the appeal court granted the office of the DPP's application to overturn Mundell's sentence under the new Firearms Act. Last year, Mr. Mundell, otherwise called Ginseng, pleaded guilty to illegal possession of a firearm and was sentenced to 4 years and 3 months in prison under the new act. However, upon further consultation, the DPP urged the Court of Appeal to review the sentence, noting that the indictment was incorrectly drafted under the legislation. Shalois Smikle has that story.
Dennis Mundell was arrested in 2022 following a search of his house which led to the discovery of an illegal firearm. He later pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 51 months in prison. The DPP had submitted that Mundell's sentencing was woefully inadequate, given that the offense would attract a mandatory minimum sentence of at least 15 years under the new Firearms Act. Upon review of the DPP's submission, the Court of Appeal on Friday ruled that the convictions be overturned and the case be retried for the appropriate charges to be laid against him. DPP Llewellyn told our news center that the error was made due to the inadequate time the prosecution had to review the new Firearms Act at the time of the sentencing.
The new Firearms Act had just been brought into force. So as with any new legislation, you may have differences in interpretation, but we don't have the leisure to look at the variety of interpretation. We have to use it immediately. So it would appear that the wrong charge was put on the indictment. So you have Section 45, you have Section 5, where you can have possession of one, a weapon that is prohibited, and the other, an unauthorized weapon, but it has different meanings. So it was just the wrong section that was used. So we filed the appeal in the interest of justice.
She says her office is prepared for the retrial, given that the judiciary has a better understanding of the act.
I think now we are all on the same page in terms of the judiciary as well as the office of the DPP on what the interpretation of the section is. Because remember too that the sentence that was given by the judge, most importantly and critically, the sentence by the judge was a nullity. Now the sentence was a nullity because based on even the section that he pleaded guilty to, there was a mandatory minimum. And I believe the judge went way below that. It should be a mandatory minimum, I believe, of 15 years.
DPP Llewellyn says now that the convictions have been overturned, the accused has a chance to maintain the guilty plea or go to trial.
It is up to him, the accused, on the advice of his lawyer, whether to maintain a plea or we would go to trial and try the case. But we will change the charge on the indictment to Section 5, being in possession of a prohibited weapon. It also is a cautionary tale then to the judiciary that there's a mandatory minimum which you cannot go below.
Shalois Smikle for Nationwide News.
There's been an almost 12% decline in murders since the start of the year. That's according to the latest statistics from the Jamaica Constabulary Force, JCF. Dana Davy reports.
According to the JCF, 223 murders were committed between January 1 and March 16. That's 29 fewer than the 252 murders recorded over the corresponding period last year. 31 homicides were recorded over the last 7 days alone. The St. James Police Division continues to account for the highest number of murders. The parish recorded 30 homicides since the start of the year, 6 fewer than the corresponding period last year. 22 homicides were recorded in St. Catharines South, 2 more than the corresponding period in 2023. Both St. Andrews South and Westmoreland have recorded 20 murders so far this year. Portland recorded the lowest number of murders so far this year, with 2. Meanwhile, there has been a slight increase in shootings during the period under review. According to the JCF, there have been 213 incidents of shooting so far this year. That's 3 more than last year's numbers for the corresponding period. However, the JCF says all other major crimes such as rape, robbery, and break-ins have declined. Dana Davy for Nationwide News.
The Justice Minister Delroy Chuck says the government is moving expeditiously to craft new legislation to address the vexed issue of jury misconduct. He told Nationwide News that a review of the legislation that exists in England is now taking place with the aim of having similar laws in Jamaica. There's been intense debate in the legal fraternity about whether judge-alone trials should be used as a deterrent to jury tampering following the UK-based Privy Council's quashing of the murder conviction of dancehall artist Vybz Kartel along with his 3 co-accused. The Privy Council cited jury tampering as the primary reason for its decision. The case is set to return to the Jamaican Court of Appeal for determination of a retrial. Minister Chuck says the drafting of the new legislation is a top priority.
We are really at the beginning. This legislation, which was enacted in England in 2002, I believe, just came to my attention at least, and probably the nation's attention, because of the Privy Council ruling. Since then, I have had a copy of the legislation, and I have asked my legal team to work expeditiously on it so that a similar legislation can be put in place at the earliest possible time.
Delroy Chuck, the Minister of Justice. Meanwhile, the Jamaican Bar Association is actively considering its position on the amendment of the Jury Act to facilitate judge-alone trials if the impartiality of a jury panel has been called into question. President of the association, Kevin Powell, made the disclosure when contacted by Nationwide News. Speaking in his personal capacity, Mr. Powell says even though he would support an amendment to the Jury Act to address jury tampering, any changes must also take into account the right of the accused to a fair hearing.
Personally, I would support any initiative that would assist the court and the judicial system to address any injustice that could arise in jury tampering circumstances similar to what happened in the case in question. The focus has been on amending the Jury Act to allow for a judge to conclude a trial after discharging a jury. Any amendment to permit a judge to do this would have to be in very clearly defined circumstances that do not deprive the accused of a right to a fair trial.
Mr. Powell believes that other issues that affect jurors also need to be addressed. The payment to jurors is one such matter which he says should accompany any change to the existing legislation.
However, aside from amendments to the Act, we should also be considering other initiatives such as increasing the stipend payable to jurors to serve, allowing for jurors to be sequestered, and providing satisfactory facilities and other arrangements for citizens to discharge their civic duty. I think it has to be a combination or a consideration of all these factors that would allow us to address any systemic issues that we have in relation to the jury service.
Kevin Powell, the president of the Jamaican Bar Association. Outgoing Commissioner of Police Major General Anthony Anderson will symbolically hand over command of the Jamaica Constabulary Force JCF to his successor Dr. Kevin Blake in a ceremony at the Commissioner's office today. Deputy Commissioner of Police Blake, who's in charge of force development and logistics, will become the 15th native Jamaican to hold the post of Commissioner. Major General Anderson told our news center that Dr. Blake's work was instrumental in transforming the JCF.
He got that portfolio. So a lot of the heavy lifting on the transformation, he led it. And so a lot of the design, each one of those commanders at the deputy commissioner level would not only report internally, but when we were doing our ISO, they would be speaking to auditors and all of that. So every one of them knows what's going on, but also got exposed to actually how you do transformation.
DCP Blake will officially take control of the JCF tomorrow. General Anderson says things are in place for Dr. Blake to take charge of the unfinished tasks that lie ahead.
So what's the regret you have that you haven't completed?
Not really regret.
Or what you haven't completed that you would have loved to complete?
But Cliff, the thing is that they're all lined up ready to go. So it doesn't matter if I complete them. He will complete them.
Major General Anthony Anderson, the outgoing Commissioner of Police. The St. Anne Police are probing the chopping death of a 36-year-old man accused of raping a 14-year-old girl in Monique on Friday. The dead man has been identified as 36-year-old Orlando Coward, otherwise called Tio. Coward was set upon by residents after he was accused of raping the teenage girl and abducting a 2-year-old boy from the community on Thursday. Commanding officer for the St. Anne Police, Senior Superintendent Dwight Powell says the police have been searching for Coward since Thursday after a report was made that he had raped the young girl.
On Friday, March 15th, 2024, about 7 a.m., he broke into a dwelling house and attempted to abduct an 8-year-old female child. The mother of this child challenged and wrested her daughter from him. Coward instead abducted her 2-year-old son and took him into bushes. She raised an alarm and residents pursued him and rescued the 2-year-old boy from him. Shortly after, he returned armed with a firearm which he used to hold up resident who, in a bid to repel his attack, inflicted several wounds on him, killing him on the spot. 2 firearms were recovered from him, a shotgun and the other a homemade handgun.
SSP Powell is reminding the public that it is illegal to take matters into their own hands.
The Center on Victim Support, as also our partners from CPFSA, have been engaged along with local religious leaders. We are doing some intervention at this time in the community. Again, we want to use this medium to say and reassure the people, especially in the rural communities, that the police in Centan, we continue to do our endeavor best to ensure that your communities are kept safe, and we would rather that you not assume the role of the police. Leave these official function to us.
Senior Superintendent Dwight Powell, the commanding officer for the Centan Police. The Association of Government Medical Consultants has threatened a disruption in health services if the government does not provide a swift response to their concern about their salaries under the new compensation review system. The group says they have usually been accommodating with the government regarding salary issues. However, in a release on Sunday, the consultants say they have now reached the point of frustration in the current process after 2 years. It says some consultants have been asked to take a salary cut. The association says the proposal cannot be acceptable for the medical leadership of the health sector. The group says normalcy cannot be guaranteed if such a continued negative position by the government continues. They are urging the government to give justice to the General Medical Consultant Body of Jamaica. With the budget debate now underway in the Parliament, the Jamaica Teachers Association JTA says it's listening to hear detailed plans to address burning concerns at the primary and early childhood levels. JTA President Leighton Johnson told Nationwide News that the issues facing the primary and early childhood sectors should be placed on the front burner and the appropriate funds allocated to deal with the challenges.
What we really want to see is that these particular sectors, the primary sector, the early childhood sector, are properly funded, where teachers, trained teachers in the early childhood school, they can be properly remunerated. The resources that are required at that level will be channeled into those schools. And of course, we want to see this kind of movement.
Mr. Johnson says more needs to be done for special education.
We are also interested in hearing the allocation towards to education with a focus on special education. It is really urgent that additional special education centers be established across the nation, and this would increase accessibility for those individuals who are in need of these specialist institutions. So we really want to see an increase in that regard.
Leighton Johnson there, the president of the Jamaica Teachers Association, the JTA. In international news now, the Israel Defense Forces IDF have launched an overnight raid on Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City with reports of tanks and heavy gunfire. Located in Gaza City in the north of the Gaza Strip, thousands have already fled since Israel began its operation in October. The hospital is the largest in the region and is being used as a shelter for displaced people as well as patients. The IDF says it's now in control of the hospital and says Hamas was using the site to launch attacks. Hundreds of displaced Palestinians are sheltering at the hospital, which was raided by Israeli forces earlier in the conflict. The IDF called on people in the hospital and surrounding areas to evacuate to a nearby humanitarian area. A doctor at the hospital told the BBC his team began hearing gunfire in the early hours. There are reports of tanks and heavy shooting at the facility. Israel has since said it was carrying out a high-precision operation in limited areas of the hospital.